What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Yadon Israel back with another episode of Lit. Now, the next episode that's coming up with me and Ashley Ford has a bit of clipping, so it's like some weird audio thing that's happening. We were too loud, the mic's too loud. Whatever the case is, we were going to do it over, but we figured the conversation was just too important to do that. So we ask y'all to bear with us with this episode, and it's going to be dope. It's going to be lit. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can watch more videos like this. All right? Enjoy. Hey, what's going on, y'all? We are back again with another episode of Lit, the premier platform for all things literature, swaggy, and everything in between. I'm your host, Yadon Israel, aka Liddy Fontaine. Pretty Liddy's what they call me. We got none other than Ashley C. Super Swaggy Ford, who pulled up with this bomb-ass Rorschach-esque fly dress.
It reminded me a little bit of like a Rorschach test that was designed by Rothko or something.
So we have a swag cam. So we need you to stand up against the step and repeat, so we can catch the whole outfit, the whole swag. Yeah. So walk us through the fit. So this is
a dress that I literally got yesterday from Banana Republic, which never has anything that fits me, but a bitch got lucky.
Yeah.
I have this beautiful necklace from my little brother, so my lucky rabbit. And I just have like these like cute little shoes from Aldo that I got with the floral pattern on the side. And
well, we gotta talk about these accessories.
Accessories. This is my grandmother's. My grandma passed away 2 years ago. And, she left me a bunch of her jewelry. This is one of the pieces she left me. This is a piece that I actually just bought in Brooklyn, just over in Crown Heights not too long ago, this ring. And this is my engagement ring.
Then the glasses. Like, she just like all the accents. This is
Warbies.
This is what Ashley Ford does. So Ashley Ford, writer, speaker, she be fucking up the internet if you she's been doing her damn thing. So the most immediate thing, we on Twitter. I'm on Twitter yesterday, and I see Ashley, like, you're trending with a thread about the ways in which white people think that black people don't pay for college.
Yeah, and
what sparked it was a recent New York Times story about the fact that the Department of Justice, or Trump's administration, is having the Department of Justice, civil rights lawyers look into the discrimination happening against white students at college practices. So, take us through, like, just, not necessarily just the thread, but, like, just, where, like, how the fuck, like,
I come from, my school system back in Indiana was almost entirely black. It was like something crazy, like 95% black in my high school. And so growing up in that kind of school system and with people around you who y'all all pretty much like, y'all done all seen the same movies and like, listen to the same music and stuff like that. Like growing up heavy in your own culture, it's like racism to me was this thing that was like out there somewhere. And it didn't really have anything to do with me or my life because I was surrounded by black people and we was just doing our thing. And white people could, whatever. Like it was a few white people at our school, but, those white people who were surrounded by black people too. So they wasn't stupid and they wasn't doing nothing, crazy. But, I went to college and my college was a, predominantly white institution. And before college,
State, right?
I went to Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. I had 7 majors at different times.
Okay.
Everything from psychology, fashion, merchandising, social studies, education, and then finally landed in English.
Okay.
I'm actually not on my degree. I have 2 classes left that I have to finish.
Damn,
Out here
navigating.
I'm out here navigating. I'm trying to do what I can.
Right.
But my point was, because I came from that background, there was just certain stuff I didn't hear growing up or have to deal with growing up that once I was thrust into adulthood, I immediately, the summer before college, working at a Boy Scout camp, teaching wilderness survival. And one of my co-counselors, were talking about me going to college in the fall. And he just was like, oh, well, I didn't even apply to college because I don't get to go free because I'm white. And I was like, who free? And then confused because at first, because he didn't say it in like a mean way, and there was definitely no malice behind it. It was pure ignorance.
Yeah.
Because it was pure, like at first, I, like for a second was like, oh shit, does he know something I don't know? Like,
yeah.
But it don't make no damn sense because I did a bunch of research trying to figure out how to pay for college. Yeah. So there's no way that's. And I was like, wait a minute, like he really believes that. And I was like, I'm not going to college for free. And our conversation is happening. I noticed the other people at the table are starting to, like, look up and like join the conversation. And it's all white people. Like I'm the only black person at this point that anybody knows has ever worked at the camp. Yeah. And they're all like, wait a minute, that's not true? And they're just for real. Like it's not, it's not true. Y'all don't get to go to college. And I was like in the Twilight Zone, right? Like I'm definitely that picture, you know, that meme of Mr. Krabs where like everything funny around me. He's like, that's how I felt in that moment because I didn't know that kind of ignorance was even really out there.
Right.
But we ended up having this conversation. I found out, you know, it wasn't just college. Like they thought we got housing for free. They thought we got food for free. They thought that we got all these things from the government for free. Like black people was just out here like, you know, getting like we had a socialist government that they didn't have. Right. They didn't have access to.
Which they already have access to. Right?
Listen.
So because like you think about like what affirmative action is, like I mean what it's always been, it's been giving somebody like perfect example. I had a few friends, right? Mm-hmm. Asked me to help them write their college essays. Like help them with it, edit. That's the only time writers are relevant. Yeah. I need you to help me with this cover letter. Yes. It was interesting because, you know, all the questions, you know, all graduate school questions veer on the same thing. Why do you feel like you deserve to be here? Mm-hmm. And I've had several white friends, you know, give a story about their grandfather, what their great-grandfather did to get them to this point, and the stories about their great-grandfather. And several times I had to tell them, like, yo, you made a great case for your great-grandfather being at this school. But you ain't explain why you deserve to be at this school. And I realized that white privilege is so like foundational that like people, you know, like they don't even understand. Like you talk about bootstrap narratives, but you don't even exercise that. So I was like, did you study for the SATs? What did you actually do? Yeah. And it's like that's like not the old concept of what can I say? An individual sense of accomplishment does not exist in the same ways for like white people of privilege, because so much of their privilege has been taught to them as all these things that come before your accomplishment I'm not going to tell you about. I'm just going to tell you about like, oh, you got this job because you're smart or because you worked hard, which negates, no, you got this job because you probably did some things, but we already laid the groundwork. Like you were able to walk because we paved the way. Right. Whereas like, and like, you know, the black experience is like we're always being constantly aware of like the people that came before us, right? Like even that whole concept of lifting as we climb. Like you have to be aware of the sort of traditions you're born out of. And I'm like looking at that and I'm like, damn, like this is sad. Like at first I was like frustrated by it, but I'm like, you don't even know really who you are in your own life. Yes. Because your history like subsumes you in such a way where you can't even like come up for air.
It's limiting. Yeah. Like, that's probably the thing that gets me most about racism is, like, you're not just hurting me, to be perfect. Like, you are, but, like, it's not just me. Like, you are also messing things up for yourself, for, you know, the generations that will come after you. Because, like, to be perfectly honest, like, this blackness is beautiful. Right. And there is so much to it. There's so much beautiful thought and language and art and just like the way we connect with each other. Like blackness is so beautiful that like even if like I wasn't a black person, I feel like I would still want to be able to appreciate that beauty because I appreciate it in cultures that aren't mine. I can look at like the idiosyncratic ways that like they interact with each other that is about who they are and their identity that has nothing to do with me. But I can look at it and go, that is beautiful. Like what is happening there is a beautiful thing. And it's messed up that so many people like in the world see that, see those idiosyncrasies, and what they see is I'm not part of it, and so it is exclusive,
right.
Or it is like, you know, a bad thing, or they are keeping me out. Like they can't see the beauty in without their inclusion, and also just like the beauty in being different in a way that doesn't have anything to do with like intentional difference,
right?
You know, like white people do a lot of like trying to separate themselves from, you know, whatever, or trying to identify themselves in a way that's like really intentional, you know, like, and I feel like what messes them up with like black people and Latin people and sometimes Asian people and stuff like that is the fact that there's something about us that like is not intentional. Like nobody really, like you don't get to check a box, you know, when you get ready to be born, like, yeah, black sounds good this year. Like nobody gets to do that. But born of that identity is something beautiful. And, you know, not necessarily exclusive because we want it to be exclusive. It's just like exclusive by way of like, I'm black. So
and it's also something we always take account for. When it's like, I've realized that, like, you know, as a person who knows what it feels like to be left out, I'm always hyper aware of someone who feels left out. Yeah. So, like, I run a book club, and one day it was like, you know, my book club, a lot of people of color show up, and it was like one or two white people in the thing, and we were talking about, you know, white people. And the whole time I was watching the white person's face because, like, I know what it's like to have to hear about yourself in a way that removes you from your body. Like, am I even here? Right? Yeah. So, and I was paying attention to him. But the one thing I noticed the whole time we were talking, and what book we were reading? We was actually reading Your Face and Mine by Jess Rao. Nice. It's a book about a Jewish white man who goes to China, gets racial reassignment surgery as a black dude. But what was interesting is no person of color ever asked him to answer a question on behalf of white people. Like, it was something I didn't even notice till after the meeting, but I'm like, oh shit, like nobody ever assumed that he had the answers for all white people. But when you're the one black person in the room, you have to field. You're a statesman, like you're a spokesperson, you know, like
you are a statesman.
Yeah, tell us about
Absolutely. What's really interesting about that too is like that now we're in a place where a lot of white people, not all, but a lot of white people now understand that that's rude. So they won't like directly ask you. What you'll see is them just sort of looking at you out of the corner of their eyes and stuff like that, and just being like, and just, you know, they're just gauging your reaction the whole time because they understand now that like it's messed up for you. In this room, try to make me like speak on behalf of all black people, and so they're not gonna do that, but they're gonna watch you real hard to gauge your reaction. Like they want to know, like when somebody says something, like, okay, but how do you feel? Oh, but how did she react to that? Because sometimes, you know, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to just like be on like the right side of history or right side of like, you know, whatever, and so paying attention to, you know, how people react around you. But it's like this very, like, it's a singling out, it's a tokenism that I'm just like, I can't speak for all black people. Like, I'm sorry. There's some stuff. Can we cuss on here? I'm sorry. Because that's like I've been cussing a lot.
We ain't got nobody.
It's like, you know, like, it's some shit that's like, you know, black that I don't know shit about. Okay? Right. Like, there's a lot of stuff about, like, you know, Southern black culture that, like, I see and I understand and I can kind of be familiar with because I do have some Southern black family. But I'm raised in Indiana. Yeah. Fort Wayne, Indiana. Yeah. Okay? So it's like, see stuff and like I can get it, but I also like I can't speak on that stuff. I've been in like conversations where people will be like, talk to us about like, trap music. Like what is that? And I'm like, I did not grow up with trap. Like that is not something I grew up with. And it's not a reference point like that like idea that like blackness sometimes that like even if even the people who don't think we're a monolith still think that like we know about everybody else. Right. Like that's the thing. Even if people understand that like I might not necessarily like act the same way as another random black person in the world, they still think I know all the stuff that black person knows.
Yeah. You know what gave me a lot of insight into the way white people think? Having a check. Now, I won't even say having a check because that sounds very benevolent. Having checked, getting checked for like being a boy, being a man, male privilege, right? So like I have girls, I realize that when I'm talking to a lot of women, I'm the white guy in the conversation, and that shit fucked my head up because I'm like, oh, I'm that guy, like follow home, like, well, I wouldn't follow you home, and I'm like, she's not talking about you.
She's not talking about you.
Yeah, well, my family didn't know slaves, and like I wish that slavery was based on what your family felt. So I got to see like the way that power works is that the people who enact it don't think they don't think they have it. Yep. And so when I started to see that, it became very like important for me to start to, I guess, start to interrogate whiteness more than allow it to interrogate me. Right?
Oh yeah.
Because so many times when we in these spaces, we're outnumbered. And so it becomes a matter of survival. So it's like, all right, 6 of y'all asking me these questions. This could go left. And I'm going to have to figure out how to make this shit right. But then my shit now is like, let me ask you about you. Because so much of like, and I think you posted this from Fran Lebowitz on Facebook a while ago about this thing about like when white people, when you're asking about black people, when you're asking black about race, you should also think about, well, you don't have to ask that question. Ask yourself, well, what does being white mean in race? Because the assumption is it's just doing with me. So like it's the same thing with like gender is like assuming that sexism only affects women.
Yes.
As opposed to like, nah, that shit fucks us up too. Fuck men up too.
Absolutely does.
Yeah.
It creates this space, I think anyway, where a lot of men, and especially black men, feel like there are emotional places where they are not allowed to go. And feel like there are emotional places that they are not allowed to express, and that it compromises their identity as a man to do those things.
But I can tell you honestly is that we're made to feel like it does, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm thinking like honestly about like you go in the barbershop and y'all talking or whatever, and like I remember like any dude that was like, yeah, I just bagged shorty, like you fuck yet? And you like, not just met her. You a bitch, nigga. Like, why you ain't? And so it's like a lot of the decisions to practice misogyny and like homophobia and transphobia, all these things is like, you're in your mind, you're not. And I'll say this for me. In my mind, I wasn't acting these things out because I was those things. I was acting those things out to be a man.
Yeah.
So that's why even when you talk to men about these things, like, I'm not homophobic. I just don't like, and it's like, because in their minds it wasn't explained to them, like in the same ways with white identity, like being white, I've like only, like after listening to so many white people, I'm like, you wasn't taught you was white, right? Because like, we're learning like, oh, you're black, so because you're black, this is going to happen to you, or that's going to happen to you. When white kids, it's like, oh, this happened to you because you were being an asshole. This happened to you because you were work. So it's like, race being constructed into the ideal, even like being a boy and a girl, like, I'm taught about what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do based on the expectations of my body.
Yep.
But if you're not taught those things, then you feel like you don't have a body.
Yes.
So it becomes, and that's what I realized, like, there are situations where, like, women have told me things, and I'm like, no, that's not true. But I'm thinking about not what it means for your body, but what it means for mine. And so that's when I had to pull back, and I'm like, oh, shit, like, I got to start interrogating myself. But then when I started interrogating myself, that shit solved my white people problem. Like how I navigate conversations with white people. Yeah. And I told you this off camera, like I don't argue with white people no more because it's like I already see you're in a place where you're not going to get where I'm coming from because this culture that we live in does not ever allow you to see where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, that's a big thing. Like, it's really interesting because one of the things I shared yesterday also was this video from, Jay Smooth.
Yeah.
So I shared this video from Jay Smooth where he's basically talking about if you're going to have a conversation with a white person about race and racism or something that they did, if you're going to confront them or whatever, you have to be able to separate the action from the person because you can't win the argument about who a person is.
Yeah.
Like, you're never going to be able to convince somebody that you know who they are more than they know who they are.
Right.
Like, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
But he said you can address what they did or what they said.
Uh-huh.
So it's like coming to them and being like, yeah, you said that and that was racist. Yeah. And because the next thing they say is, I'm not a racist, blah blah blah. Yeah. I don't know who you are really.
Right.
I'm not saying that like you are a racist.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about race in your life.
Right.
I'm telling you that this thing you said is a thing that a racist person would say.
Right.
So if you're not a racist person, like, that's fine, but you need to know that like you're using the language of racist people or you're doing the work of a racist person, even if you don't consider yourself a racist.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I'm trying to impart to you, not who you are, but what you've done here.
Yeah.
Or, like, I'm not talking about your intention, I'm talking about your effect.
Yeah.
And I think that the same is true for men a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations with men where, and I found that, like, this is another conversation, like, with men, like, and white people, that if you say one thing, it can usually help settle the conversation, and it's, how would you know? How would you know? When a man tells me, when I tell him about an experience and he goes, I don't believe that's true, or I don't believe that happens and stuff like that, my reaction is always, how would you know?
What's the response?
And the response is usually silence. Because I'm like, how would you know what it was like 24/7 to be in a woman's body navigating this world?
And the usual thing I've heard and I've said, I got sisters, I got mothers, which is assumption is that they tell you everything.
Yep.
And that's also, I think, the way power operates is that
they feel safe enough to tell.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
And that's what I've learned is like a lot of stories. I'm getting a lot of stories from women telling me a lot of things specifically because I'm shutting the fuck up more. And so you hear these stories, so like it gets to a place where it was like before you thought this was like 1 in a million, like damn, this is everybody, like oh yeah. And then like the way women, the same way like black people talk about racism, like oh yeah, racist, yeah, that's what it is. It's like, oh yeah, he took his dick out when I was in the Uber too. I was like, wait, what? Niggas taking their dicks out? Like niggas because you a boy, and I'm like, nah, niggas ain't taking their dicks out. And niggas really taking their dicks out. And then you're like, yo, and that really fucks you up. But I think one of one of the reasons I've seen you've been able to like navigate, and it's not to say that this navigation doesn't come at a price of your body or your emotional state or your psychological state, but I see that one of the things that you're able to do, the weapon you have is language. That allows you to not kill a motherfucker.
Absolutely.
Who was the first writer for you that kind of showed you that writing could be a weapon? Oh, who was the first person you read?
That showed me that writing could be a weapon? Wow. This is gonna probably sound weird, but Terry McMillan.
Okay. Stella.
When I was a kid, I didn't read when Stella got her groove back, but when I was a kid, and I mean a kid, my mom basically let me read whatever I could read. If I could read it, then I could have it, and I could read it. Yeah. So I read stuff like Mama. I read Waiting to Exhale. Yeah. I read Disappearing Acts. Like, I read these books as a kid that centered black women and their stories and their extremely complicated lives. And these women were always like this fantastic mix of like vulnerable and weak but strong and capable. And it was representations of women unlike anything black women specifically, unlike anything I had ever seen up until that point.
Right.
And it was addictive. And I realized, even as a kid, like I'm talking like in like 4th and 5th grade, I'm reading these books and I was like, in my mind, I'm like, she is like making this space for Black women where there was none before. Mm-hmm. She's killing it. And on top of that, like, she is writing in a way that is just like ferocious. Like, if you ever read a Terry McMillan book, which, you know, Black men rarely do. Well, men rarely do. But her language is searing. It is searing. Okay. Like, she would write, fuck this nigga, fuck this dude. You know, whatever, stuff like that. Like, it was very, like, heavy and real. And it felt like a blade. Like, it felt like a blade. It felt like it cut through me, even as a child. Right. And I still read them all the time because they just remind me of what's possible.
I gotta read her. I didn't read Zora Neale Hurston for the reason I didn't read Terry McMillan. I'm like, this is gonna be some men hating shit. I'm not reading that or whatever. And I, like, you know, what was it? I know what? No, fucking. Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I read Zadie Smith's essay called "What Is Soulful," and Changing My Mind. And I read Zadie Smith's essay. Zadie Smith had taken the same stance. Like, she didn't want to read something that was like sort of like in this like I don't know, like grief of like, oh, this like men blah blah blah. When she read it, she was like, oh, this is like my sister. This is not somebody I should hate. Mm-hmm. But that opening paragraph of Their Eyes Were Watching God, when she was like, men get to dream and women have to decide very early if they're going to dream, if they're going to live in reality. And whichever one that they choose, the other one is dead. And I'm like, oh, wait, what is this? And I, like, allowed myself to hear, I think, more or less than, like, when I read, I'm not necessarily, like, you know, doing the act of the eyes, but, like, I'm trying to listen to what's happening. And so you see the relationships unfold. And what I saw that book, even though the book involved 3 men, it really involved the relationship Janie has with herself.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, when I had that perspective, it became easier for me to listen to women because I'm like, this ain't about you, which is so very easy for me as a dude to always, you know, and as a dude, you know, that's why I'm saying, like, I feel like when you said, like, the whole thing about, like, men not being allowed, I feel like it's also, like, the sexism that, like, fucks women over, fucks men over too.
Yes.
Same way, like, racism that fucks Black people over, fucks everybody over, but the double tragedy is when the person who thinks that they're not getting fucked, like, the person that's also getting fucked don't think that they're like, oh, yeah, my money's good, right? And it's like, oh, my money fucked up too. Yeah. And how I like to, like, not get in not fall into those traps where it's like, the only way I can respect a woman or understand a woman is because I have women, like a mother and sisters, right? Like, oh, it's like, even if I don't have those things, I should still be able to recognize those injuries. Yeah.
Do you think that's what 444 is about?
I think that's what it arrived at.
Yeah.
I think, and to me, and I wrote this a minute ago, I said that the beautiful thing about that album is, I don't think is the message, but the listener.
Yes.
Because if wherever you're listening from, it says more about where you are than where he is.
Absolutely.
Because what I realized listening to the album was like, oh, I don't need this album. Meaning, like, I got to a place in my life where it's like, I don't need a daughter to, like, see that. I don't need to, like, hit $1 billion to, like, quote unquote know my worth. It's like, Jay-Z had to make these mistakes at this level to learn the things he's learning now. It took him 13 albums. I'm like, I don't have a book out yet. It don't have. If I'm taking 13 books to get to where Jay-Z is, and I wasn't paying attention to what Jay-Z was doing. Right. And so I think that in the same ways, like the first, until I listened to 444, the actual song, I never realized that the first album, which is to me the pinnacle of Jay-Z's rap career, is The Blueprint. And on Song Cry, I thought Song Cry was like the most emotionally vulnerable thing, and at the time it was. But then you listen to 444, and I realized, damn, he never actually said I'm sorry on Song Cry. He was just like, I fucked you over. That's fucked up. The song will cry. I won't.
Yes.
And I took that as an apology. I'm like, damn, he remorseful. But then you hear what real remorse sounds like, and you like, oh.
Wow.
So a lot of times when I thought me saying, like, you know, well, I fucked you over, girl. And then you think that that's the apology. Like, I fucked you over. Like, you ain't say sorry. Well, I gotta say I'm sorry for. Like, yeah. That album let me know, like, it let me know how mature I was because I was able to listen to it for what it was.
Wow.
Yeah. What about you? How was that? Like, what was your response to that?
My response to it was just the thought that, like, I wish I was closer to more Black men.
Yeah.
That was, like, after listening to it, like, that was my thing. Because I have a I have brothers, I have cousins, you know, but my dad was in prison for 30 years. He just got out this past November. He was there my whole life. My fiance happens to be white.
Yeah.
You know, and...
Now, when you say happens to be white, what's the language behind that?
You know, he and I were talking really recently about, like, the political climate and where I am in my life right now, and, you know, different conversations I've had, you know, books I've read, things that I've learned. And he asked me, you know, if we weren't together, do you think you could date a white man right now? And I said, no, absolutely not.
You got in at the ground level.
He really did. I mean, to be honest, at the ground level, like, he came into my life at a time where, you know, like, it's not like I was like, yeah, white people are great. It wasn't like that. It was just like he came into my life at a time where I think I was able to feel a lot more, to be perfectly honest, naive about how white people operated in the world and how white people might operate with me and things like that. You know, I was still at that very white college. You know, like, I was surrounded by white people every day, you know, in a, like,
there was no black student
intimate way. No, that absolutely was.
Were you a part of those, or, like...
I was like an adjacent part of those. A lot of it...
Black adjacent.
I was black adjacent. I really was in college, like, because I was always, like, super busy. I was the president of the student voluntary club, and so I was always, like, at some school tutoring or at, like, an old folks home painting old ladies' nails or, like, reading them books and stuff. Like, I was always doing things like that. And a lot of what the black community centered around at my college was the Divine Nine. And a lot of parties and stuff like that. And I have really bad social anxiety, and I couldn't really go to parties. I still kind of can't go to many parties. But so I knew everybody. And, you know, they knew me. Like, there weren't enough black people on campus to, like, be walking around not knowing who the fucking black people were. Like, we knew each other, and we were in conversation. And I'm still close to some of the black people that I went to college with, but I was never, like, ingrained in the community the way a lot of people were. Like, I was ingrained in, like, the lit community, and I was the only black lit major. Like, I was the only one in that department.
And I definitely I will say that, like, I've like, my entrance into literature came way later. Like, 1920, when I really started putting my head in books. But I grew up, like, my first language, I've said this, like, my father taught me how to rap first. So I knew, like, I learned how to speak by rapping. So, like, aesthetically, I was always going to be around black people in a way. Whereas, like, I've always seen that, like, people, like, black kids who were book heavy, it was, like, a certain level of, like, isolation and alienation. So, like, who else would you be around besides other people who commune? Like, who else did you commune with? And so it's, like, a circumstantial thing that, like, and that's why I've always been interested in how just black people in general reconcile, especially navigating, like, a culture that's so, how can I say this? That's, like, where, like, black bodies are at the mercy of, like, white power, and then to navigate a you know, very, like, a romantic relationship with a white person.
It helps, to be perfectly honest, like, it helps that Kelly just, you know, he ain't your average bear. Like, he is a person who is and always has been deeply reflective about his place in the world and the meaning of being a white man, you know, like, and not, when I say always, I mean since I've known him.
Yeah.
I can't say before, but since I've known him, you know, like, I think the things that would have made me go, I can't do this, if I'd had to explain a lot of shit to him, if I'd had to, like, defend myself or my identity, or if I'd had to defend black people or blackness or Black Lives Matter, like, any of that stuff, like, this, or even, like, if that had been the case with his family, this never would have worked. Also in Indiana.
Okay.
Like, Kelly grew up half, like, weird rich, like, not rich, but like close to richness, close to wealth, like art kid, and then like half hillbilly. Like, our first date, he took me 4-wheeling, like, in the mud, like, on one of them ATVs. Like, that was, like, our first date. And, I mean, it was super fun, but it was some hillbilly shit. But he also spent every summer in L.A. with his aunt, who was the president of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Okay. And so he would go there, and they would just chill all summer. And when I say chill, I mean, like, they're kind of chill, because I don't know if you noticed, but white people love activities. Like, just, like, camps and hiking and tours and like, so he did all that stuff. So he was in, like, this very exclusive, like, art world scene, and then also did, like, a bunch of hillbilly shit. And then on top of that, he's a big philosophy nerd. He has read more books, to be perfectly honest, than anybody I've ever met in my entire life. He reflects on himself. So by the time Kelly, like, he was interested in me and he approached me, he had done all his own work.
And so that approach, what was the thing for you that was like, because I saw the man repeller thing and I used, and it was like it was like a couple's article.
Yeah. And
you was explaining that, like, for you, did you have, like, I was watching the Maya Angelou documentary, that sort of reservation, like, oh shit, like, people not going to think did you have that compliment?
I mean, because I had that with people. I already had, like, some black people on campus and stuff calling me stranger and stuff because I didn't go to parties and, things like that. So that was already there. And I was like, but there was also this part of me, and this has always been a very strong center in me, that I know who I am. Mm-hmm. I know who I am. And I don't need anybody else's affirmation about who I am. Mm-hmm. Like, why would I ever, and it has always tripped me up that anybody ever allows anybody else to question their identity. Like, I know who I am. So, like, I'm not worried about, like, am I less black because I have a white fiance. You know what I'm worried about? I am I'm treating myself so well as a black woman and knowing that I deserve to be treated well, that I'm with the kind of man who treats me better than anybody has in my entire life. Right. And when I say anybody, I mean anybody. Right. This man would do anything for me and does all the time. Like, I am his queen. He loves me. And I think that part of loving myself and honoring myself as, like, a gorgeous, queer, like, brilliant black woman is allowing myself to be loved fully. Right. If I had to keep things from Kelly, if I had to hide parts of myself, if I had to play down parts of myself, if I had to do any of that, we wouldn't be together because that wouldn't work for me, and I know that I deserve better. Yeah. But what has actually happened is that this is a person who has encouraged me, who has opened my life, who has revealed in certain ways me to me. Mm-hmm. Like, who has said, no, actually, this is why you can do this. This is why you are capable of this. This is what I see in you. Mm-hmm. And so this thing you're doing right now where you're doubting yourself or where you're playing down your accomplishments or whatever, I'm not going to allow you to do that. Yeah. For Kelly, his thing is he will never, I have people who enjoy my work, who reach out, who are very excited and, exuberant and things like that. And Kelly's thing is he will never be outstand. He will never be. He will never let somebody fan for me, stand for me, encourage me, whatever, more than he does.
That's beautiful.
And so at the end of the day, it's this thing where it's like, being black and him being white absolutely could be an issue in our relationship. The fact that it isn't or hasn't been so far is because of the work he did independent of me. And that's the only way this could work for me.
So let me ask you another question. Yes. Being that you navigate, and this is like the writer's life too, right? Like the public and the private is always the thing with navigating, especially you're on Twitter, you got a big presence in these public spaces. How do you reconcile that? Like I guess reading your tweets and you're just like, oh, this woman is a certain way. And then readers have to now, you got like, a white fiance, like you have a life, even like I listened to the, I think the Longest Shortest Time podcast, and you were talking about the fact that your father was incarcerated for a rape that he committed. And yet you write so unapologetically about certain topics, but your real life puts itself at odds with the image that I know that people will get from the writing.
Yeah.
How does... Because I know people have brought things to you like, oh, but you wrote this. Mm-hmm. So what about... And like, how do you grapple with that?
You know, my dad... Here's the thing. Again, like, for anybody who doesn't know, my dad went to prison when I was a few months old for rape. And I didn't know about this until I was 14.
Yeah.
But when I was 13, I was raped.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't find out that my dad was in prison for rape until a year after I had been raped. Mm-hmm. And you know what happens when you're 14 and you find out this person who you love and cherish and who you have built up in your mind to be like this magnificent man or whatever, you find out he did this terrible thing, and not only that he did that, but that it is the same thing that shattered you. Like earlier, you realize really, really quickly that we really want to live in a world of extremes and absolutes, and, you know, black and white and wrong or right, whatever it is, and we really don't.
Yeah.
We really don't. And I think part of what motivated me to become a writer in the first place was the opportunity to have my life and my opinions and my words create this juxtaposition that would then cause real conversation about these gray areas that we pretend don't exist, or that we pretend, you know, we have an absolute answer for, when, like, the truth is we have absolute answers actually for nothing. Because how many times have you seen somebody call a person a hero in one instance for killing people, and a monster in another instance for killing people? And it's always like, well, there's context and there's reasons and, you know, stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, but over here we're honoring, you know, service people, which, you know, that's fine, you know, like people in the army and stuff like that. But in another country, they're murderers. Like, they are just murderers.
Right.
And that's what that is.
Right.
And I feel like part of what keeps us apart from each other, a lot of the tension in this country, not just about race, but just about, like, you know, people to people, like, period, is the fact that we really do think that knowing 1 to 2, 3 things about a person can give us a full picture.
Yeah. And I think that that's indicative in, I think it's another thing that sort of is what you're a part of, not by choice but by circumstance and by where we are. It's like the think piece generation.
Oh yeah.
Where like everyone has a fresh take, and these takes are less about like interrogating the self and putting oneself in conversation with one's own perspective and thoughts, but it's more about, how do I become a statesman?
Yep.
How do I become the person at the table that everyone seeks for? Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, for me personally, that's what I wanted to be. Right, because you know, with that comes the money. And
with that comes the money.
Yeah, you could be on you know, the Roland Martins and CNN,
right.
And you could be like, yeah, and blah blah blah. And then the more I started watching, I'm like, what real conversation do you know can get squabbed in a 10-minute segment? No real conversation.
None.
And then because of that, I started taking those avenues less and less. And then a kid gets killed by the police or something happens, and like, because I've been the guy to always have something to say, then it became expected of me to say stuff. And then when things started to come out, I'm like, I don't even know what to say. Mm-hmm. But then that expectation is, then I've learned that, like, you know, what happens when you allow other people's expectations to become your own is that you become a very, predictable person.
Yes.
Because you become less of a person. You become like a caricature of yourself. Like, I'm gonna perform thinking as opposed to really think.
Oh, diplomacy used to be my thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved being the most diplomatic person in a room.
And when did that shatter for you? When did that like rupture?
Probably.
So I'm sorry.
That's okay.
When did you start writing? Just so I can get a timeline.
I started writing seriously, like actually taking my writing seriously, probably in 2008.
How old are you at this time?
I was 23.
Okay.
I think.
So 23 years old, and your entrance. What was your first? Were you first writing for the internet, or were you writing for journals? Because I think that also marks a certain type of
I would say journals on the internet.
Okay,
is
cool.
what I was writing
like literary
for.
journals.
Yeah, like the first place I was published online was the Rumpus.
Okay.
You know, to
was
give
Isaac
you like
still
an idea.
Fitzgerald
Isaac was
still
there. Isaac
yeah.
published my first essay.
Okay.
Roxane Gay edited it.
Okay.
So like that was the first thing I had published on the internet. And from
what was the piece
there,
about?
it was about living in Missouri. Well, initially it was about my mother having a miscarriage and subsequently having a little bit, well, actually a stillbirth, and then subsequently having a little bit of a breakdown, and me going to live with my grandma in Missouri and my brother staying with my mom, and about like this sort of like fracture that happened in the relationship with my mother that sustained for many, many years. And that's what that essay was about. And it's probably to this day, to be perfectly honest, my favorite thing I've ever written.
That's dope. So now back to the rupture now. You started in 2008. When did you become, because that seems like a person on the page, but then you start to turn into this diplomat. How did that happen? How did that
I think it happened because like I was one of the early adopters of Twitter. Like I was on Twitter for a really long time. I used to be under Twitter on a whole other account, like under a completely different name, which I scrapped in 2010 and started over. But I was on there and I was like seeing all these conversations happening all the time, and I was also like starting to be introduced to basically the world of social justice. Like I'd always been somebody who was really into things like community service, and I'd always been a person who was but social justice was not a thing I was super familiar with. And you know, I realized really quickly on the internet that like, oh, what we say on here sticks around forever.
Right.
And I think like diplomacy started for me as like a chance to develop opinions and not have things on the internet that like would say that I once believed something differently, or that I like or that I had defended, you know, whatever that like now I don't believe. And I think that need for that, like that need to like control because what I was really trying to do was like control an image. Yeah. I was trying to control an image for myself. I think the need to do that sort of went away when probably around the time that I like started working at BuzzFeed, which was in 2014.
Okay. What was the piece for you?
It wasn't even really a piece that I stopped being diplomatic. It was more of like a shift in my own understanding about who I was and about, to be perfectly honest, the importance of learning publicly. And I realized that like I no longer wanted to be the person who was like, oh, I'm scared. Maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about. Maybe I don't have an opinion that really counts. Maybe this will come back to bite me in the ass years later. And I was like, I want to be a person who says what she means more than anything else. Right. If I'm really honest with myself, that's what I want. Yeah. And I think when I hit that, that's when I started being able to write honestly about like the history of my body. I started being able to write honestly about like, to be perfectly about race, to be able to say like, you know, because I used to be such a manager of people's feelings. You know, I don't want anybody to feel bad. I just want them to understand the truth. And then I got to a place where I was like, you know what, sometimes telling the truth makes people feel bad. And it does start with myself. And it was that thing also where I was like, I never want to be a person. Because I also started to see on the internet groups of people starting to do this thing where they were like dragging people and like calling people out for stuff that I was like, I would have said that 3 months ago. Yeah. Like I know better now. Yeah. But like 6 months ago, I would have said the same thing. Yeah. And I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't be so invested in creating and maintaining a public image of like, I don't know, like perfect like propriety and things like that. Like I can't be so invested in that I stop telling the truth, because the truth is I used to have those fucked up opinions too. Yeah. You know? And I don't think I'm helping anybody by pretending I didn't. And if my ultimate goal is to like tell these stories and tell the truth and do it in a way that ends up helping people Like, I need to actually be effective. And acting like, I was born using words like patriarchy and problematic isn't helping anybody. Because people can't relate to that because it's not real.
Yeah.
Nobody was born
that's not
saying
a
stuff like
barbershop
that.
conversation, and that's
It's not.
like, and it's like, I've measured my ability. Like, how do you get those type of conversations to the barbershop? It's like you got to couch in a language that's problematic.
Yeah.
And so when someone's like, "Oh, you can't say it like that," I've started to recognize on the internet, it's like, how often are you in real conversations with people? Because I've started to see this also insidious trend of people Xing those people out of their lives.
Yep.
That you have to have the conversation with. Because it's like you're talking about changing the world, but everyone that you would have to run up against is people you're Xing out. Yeah. And so you're creating this echo chamber where, like, I feel like part of why the Trump administration had happened, which was like, the shit was like more infuriating to me than the win, was all these people like, how could this have happened? And it's like, really? Like, you. So you might have noticed this weird cut, right? But this is a meta experience we're giving you. So what happened was Siri had activated, and we had mixed the Marduces up, which Ashley loves.
They're really good.
Yeah. But we gonna have her read again.
Yep.
This fire shit that she read the first time. So it's so nice we have to hear it twice. So.
Here we go.
Yeah. So once again, for context for people.
This is an essay, a very short essay that is actually going to be expanded into a chapter of the book that I'm working on, which is just in the proposal phase. There's no like book coming out or anything yet. We'll see if I can sell it. Fingers crossed.
No. We selling that.
We sell it.
Where that money at?
We're gonna get it done.
Getting live readings on Lit. This is what this shit is about.
Okay, so this is called The Opposite of Air.
Okay.
Grandpa's fingers separated the edible parts of an almost dead frog. His fingers bent and popped its sinewy limbs, separating the muscle from its bone. The nearly departed performed a table marionette's dance for me. The kitchen walls were smokers' teeth. Age and negligence caused them to sweat yellow. They were ugly and honest, telling truths about Grandpa and what he thought it meant to maintain. I stared at them, doing my best to ignore the small splashing sound coming from an old white bucket next to the refrigerator. He'd caught a catfish. It had not wanted to be caught. Don't trust them boys out there, little girl. They ain't worth shit and they don't know shit. Grandpa spat the words onto a twitching frog's half-open body. If it had been even a little more alive, I wouldn't have been certain he was speaking to me. I nodded. Nodding was always the right answer, even when no one asked you a question. This was the beginning of another story to get hung up inside me. Old and useless, it would dry against my ribs, marking me. Another story I would learn wasn't to be repeated. I knew things about Grandpa. Maybe I knew even more than the walls. I knew he used to hit my grandma and she used to hit him right back. I knew I wasn't supposed to talk about that. If I closed my eyes when he told his old true tales, I pictured my grandmother wielding a cast iron skillet in one hand, a pot of boiling water in the other. I saw Grandpa running away from the water only to be bludgeoned by 8 pounds of Kathleen weaponry. I thought of my mother in her room, sleeping through the noise, or maybe huddled against her sisters, all of them afraid, but for whom? Their mother, their father, that the house would come falling down on all their heads. She'd knock me on my ass, then yell at me for making too much noise, Grandpa chuckled, and flung another leg into the pile. His fingers were strong and quick. The frog seemed to appreciate this about his process. He whipped a frog's torso through the kitchen window and chuckled again. I laughed, but didn't get the joke. The splashing bucket turned itself over. Its gaping maw fed the floor lake water and the one live catfish. The water raced toward dirt-filled crannies, places no one else could reach or no one else had tried. Grandpa and I watched the catfish struggle for air, or the opposite of air, spastically flipping from side to side, end to end. When it stopped moving, gills still fluttering, Grandpa picked it up with both hands, sat it in front of me. I wasn't no good. Men ain't really no good. He bent the fish into itself until there was an audible pop. I continued to hear a phantom splash from the bucket lying on its side. You'll learn to gut a fish like a man, then you won't need one. I was angry with him. These frogs and fish had eyes and, as far as I knew, ears. Why did I have to listen to his rambling? Grandpa broke and ate everything that might love him. I didn't want to sit here and learn to do the same.
But I was already here, gutting a fish like a man as if I knew what that meant. And it was another thing I had to know. I would always know how to gut a catfish in a frog's grave. I was sewn into these regrets, and I would always be angry. When Grandpa laced his fingers and turned his elbows out, ready to release tension and air built up between his knuckles, I covered my ears with scale-stained hands and begged him, please don't. I was closer to tipping over all the time, and certain that anything that spilled out of me wouldn't know how to breathe out here.
And then, this is everything has to happen for a reason, because the second time, what I'm listening to is literally, I think, the ways in which, women are taught to internalize, like, masculinity. Mm-hmm. And what in his act of love, like in the way Toni Morrison speaks about love, like, people teach you about love the way they learned it.
Yes.
And that is him teaching you, like, that's him articulating his love for you. Is like, I want you to not be ever dependent on a man. Right.
Yes.
But it's so funny how, like, this is probably not only your grandfather, but the ways in which like, men try to protect their daughters from the world. They're also predators in that same world to other women, and
yes.
So, like, how you send these two things out. That's dope. That's definitely dope. And you said that this is going to be a part of a memoir.
Yes.
That you're building out.
Yes.
So if y'all listening, y'all watching, y'all make sure y'all get on that. This better be a bidding war that jumps off this shit. I'd be curious, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're a writer.
I am.
This is going to be a memoir, essay, whatever it turns out to be. Who would you love if this got turned into, like, a show and/or film? Who would you love to see play you? And the reason why I ask this is because what I've learned in recent time is mad books and movies.
Yeah.
And what happens also is representation, because it's very key in how we interpret our art and how we, like, internalize it. A lot of times we don't have a say in who gets to represent us, right? Like, No Shots is always Saldana. I think she's a wonderful actress, but, like, she shouldn't have played. Right? But so it's like, who would you want to put your language on this? Like, if you had to bring this vision.
This is so hard, and let me tell you why. Because with Black actresses specifically, it's like, when I look at Black actresses in Hollywood, I don't see a lot that represents me, because, like, I'm a big girl, but I'm not, like, a big girl like it would make sense for, like, Gabby Sidibe to play me, even though I love Gabby Sidibe, and I think she does an amazing, like, job as, like, an actress and just generally as a person. But I would want somebody who really looked like me to play me. So I wouldn't want somebody who was, like, super thin or, like, super, like, light skin or something like that. Like, I would want somebody to look like me, and to be perfectly honest, like, right now there is a dearth of that.
But that's why I think this conversation can create that, because it can create a sort of lookout for that. Because I asked somebody else, I think Tracy O'Neill, because she has heard the main character, the protagonist in her book is a Native American figure skater, and I was like, who would you want to play? And she was like, she don't know. And I feel like us starting to think about that, like, who we want, who do we imagine these people to be? I think we start to create those worlds that didn't exist, which is what I think literature always does.
Absolutely. Now, as a kid, like, when I was, like, a skinny little, like, 5th grader and stuff like that, I can't remember her name, but the actress who plays Diane on Blackish, that little girl.
Oh, yeah. I follow her. She's dope.
She would be perfect, because I was a pretty well-behaved kid in general, but smart alecky as shit. Yeah. Like,
she's definitely
had a mouth, as far as, like, just being, and not, like, I wasn't a yeller, I wasn't like me, but I would definitely, call adults out and be like, didn't you tell me not to do that? Yeah. Why are you doing that? Yeah, and stuff like that's the kind of kid I was, and I feel like she would be perfect playing.
You can also do, like, a killer season, Get Rich or Die Trying, and you can just capture the phone at you, and you're like, you're playing yourself in high school. Right? Oh my God. This is gonna make you look younger. So, where can people find you on the web? On the social media platforms?
Oh, wow.
Drop all the tags. We got post-production shit.
We do.
That's gonna fly through and all. It's gonna look fly.
On Twitter, I am iSmashFizzle.
Okay.
On Instagram, I am SmashFizzle.
Mm-hmm.
And on Tumblr, I am SmashFizzle.
Okay.
And those are really the places where I'm at, where I'm talking about stuff that matters.
Okay.
Like, I'm on Facebook, but I ain't doing nothing over there.
And then you are an editor at Refinery 29.
I'm a senior features writer at Refinery 29.
And what does that mean for people who do not know what that title? What is that?
That means I am in the very lucky position of being able to write big stories over a lot of time.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily. I'm not the person who has like a quota of like a piece a day or something like that, which a lot of people do at media publications.
Mm-hmm.
I am in the very lucky position that I get to work on bigger, longer stories or more involved stories, and I get to take longer with them.
Okay.
And I get to mentor some of the younger writers when I get the opportunity, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. And then, where any events coming up, any announcements, anything you want to put people on to follow? This is where you plug your shit.
I know, but I'm just like, first of all, I'm so bad at that, and then second of all, like, I really intentionally took some time off this year from events and things like that so that I could focus on the book. So I don't have a lot of things like that. Like, the only thing I would tell people is like, keep an eye out for the book. And for an announcement, hopefully this year, that I have sold the book and that it's something that's going to happen. And keep coming back here, because I will always let Yadon know what's going on, and he will absolutely let you know what's going on.
You heard it here first. So, this is Yadon. You can follow us at Lit Platform on all the platforms. You can follow me at Yadon, YAHDON. Shout out to the production team, Pink Pig Production. Shout out to the music man, my G from Atlanta, from Brooklyn, who lived down in Atlanta, Surreal Jews. This is Yadon Israel with Ashley Ford. We out. It's lit.